Welcome back to Detection Dispatch, the podcast where we dissect the gray zones of security and, most importantly, spotlight the humans behind it all. I'm your host, Alex Hurtado, and today we're wandering into a topic that's both equal parts shadowy but also very structural, and that is insider threats, a potential new way to UBA. Did not mean to rhyme that. I've got some very special guests from Snowflake, a very dear partner of Ambilogic, 2024 Cybersecurity Partner of the Year we were, and also a partner of which we share a lot of very happy joint customers. So today we are going to be diving into behavioral drift, malicious intent, and just overall the fascinating challenge of separating curiosity from crime. And these folks know better than most. So Tammy, Hyder, and John, thank you so much for being here. Why don't we do a quick round robin of intros? Tell us, how you got into security, because that's always fun to hear about, and what you're working on over at Snowflake.
Cool. I guess I'll kick it off. Hey, everyone. My name is Hyder Dost. I lead threat detection and threat intelligence here at Snowflake. I've been at Snowflake for over 4 years now. Was initially brought on to build out the threat detection program, and eventually was also asked to build out the threat intel program. In terms of how I got started in cybersecurity, it started in school, in college to be specific. It was studying information technology. We had a bunch of different options in terms of concentrations, and information security was one of them. I took an intro class and from there fell in love. And I really fell in love with the aspect of hacking, investigating, root cause analysis of people are actually out there doing, malicious cybercrime. And that was so, at the time, very foreign to me, and it was very intriguing. And so from there, I ended up getting my degree in information security, internships, and most of my background is in security analysis, working as a SOC analyst, security engineer, and most recently, threat detection and threat intelligence.
Awesome. I'm so curious of your perspective of the evolution of insider threats since those days.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'll definitely jump into that.
Yeah. Tammy and John.
Go ahead, Tammy.
Okay, I'm Tammy Trong. I'm a threat detection engineer at Snowflake. I've been here for almost 5 years, definitely over 4.5. I actually started out doing incident response here at Snowflake and went to threat detection wanting to make just more and better high fidelity detections here at Snowflake. But in terms of my background, totally different from what I'm doing today. I studied exercise biology in school. My first job out of college was troubleshooting medical devices, and that translated really well into IT support, where I had the opportunity to work with our security team to implement controls org-wide just to better protect the sensitive data that we had. And it was just a natural gravitation towards security. And haven't turned back.
I love non-traditional routes into security. I feel like the most diverse of thinking brings the best problem solving skills.
Yeah, I'm John Martineau. I've been here 4 years in October. I started in the incident response track at Snowflake, if you want to call it that, trying to mature a lot of the processes that were in place and standardize a lot of things. And sort of about 1.5 years in, stumbled into I'll call them insider threat matters. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago now, we sort of formalized that under a program to sort of get a handle on this. We'll call it a problem, but just this puzzle, I guess, at Snowflake, right? And so that's sort of how it began with cybersecurity, digital forensics, and response. It was actually my last elective in college, was a computer forensics class. Mm-hmm. And I took it. It was an 8-week class, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my career. I like the puzzles and the challenges that cases bring. And so I started traditional forensics, moved to incident response and consulting, and then came here as this is my first, corporate incident response job. Very different from consulting, but it's been an interesting ride, I think, so far doing that.
I think the puzzle piece is something that I think we all share. Everyone in security, everyone one way or another likes to solve puzzles. That's like the common denominator. And speaking of which, during the COVID days, did you guys ever get into the game Among Us?
Yeah, I
which
did.
is like literally insider threat.
I mean, yeah, it is in a very gamified sense for sure. And you
Yeah.
quickly tell how people think whenever they're playing that game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember writing about it. I wrote about it in an article for like this e-forensics piece, and and it blew up because at the time that was what everybody was playing. My nieces and nephews still play it, the
Hmm.
finding the imposter, but it's like the perfect analogy for insider threat. When I have to explain to my parents what I do for a living, what cybersecurity is, I always say it's like that game.
It
That's a
sounds
very
like we've
grounded way to put it, I
identified,
think. Yeah.
as I
What'd you
say,
say, Tammy?
I think we identified the next team bonding activity.
I know. We have to do that. We definitely have to do that.
John's been
You
holding
guys
back.
should do that.
This is game, man.
I'll go easy. I'll go easy. I'll put a handicap on.
I remember going into Discord with a bunch of friends and just playing it and just trolling on there for hours, well into the night for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. That's great. It never ends.
Well, on that topic, I think we can dive in. We can start off with a pretty hot one, pretty hot question here because it leads to question the question. I know Snowflake very much respects the craft of insider threat, but do y'all think most companies do that as well? Like, do most companies even have insider threat programs, right? Do they even care to do it?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of start. I think it's a toss-up, and it comes down to organizational maturity.
Hmm.
For a lot of, I would say, startup organizations, I think that insider threat may not be their top security focus or worry, and there may be a bit of, I don't want to say negligence, but just not tracking that your employees, right, or folks that work for the company can pose a threat, right? Insiders.
Hmm.
And so it really comes down to company culture, I would say organizational maturity, and also priorities in terms of what you are looking to do with security. And also, what are you looking to safeguard, right? Do you have sensitive, data, IP, that you don't want folks to, for it to get in the wrong hands? And more often than not, I think one other, aspect of the insider threat, there's like they say, what is it? The negligent insiders. And then,
Mhm.
Yeah. Like the accidental.
yep,
Accidental, like malicious. Yeah.
exactly. Right. And so more often than not, folks don't even realize that they're doing something incorrectly by emailing themselves data or, sharing it on some platform that they're not supposed to, or accessing it from their phone or screenshotting or whatever the, endless possible ways there is. So I think it really boils down to, the company culture and where it falls in terms of priorities for an organization. And I'm sure, John and Tammy can speak to a lot of, what they've done, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there are companies that do insider threat or risk mitigation without actually calling it that.
Without
So
calling
if
it, they
you're
just lump it
if you're
into everything else.
right, they lump it into broader security. So if you're doing things like DLP, you may be focused on an external actor taking something, but really you are giving that lens of, or you have a lens of an internal actor. We'll say mishandling data, because I think a lot of time people aren't aware of policy. They're generally not trying to do wrong. They're just unaware,
Yeah.
or it's an accident, right? So I think like Hyder said, more mature organizations call insider threat or establish insider threat programs because they've identified they have specialty or the need for
Sure.
people to only think about this problem versus everything, right? So
I see
I
it
think that's
definitely.
good.
I see it definitely in the enterprise. I feel like if it's very much an established practice in the enterprise organization. Also, I see a pattern with cloud native types of companies. I feel like they always have that. But as a vendor, I see a lot of folks that also don't. But there are a few that come, asking whether Anvologic supports UEBA type of use cases, but and I think that it's a pretty interesting time in the market because many organizations are finding that these legacy UEBA technologies are super, super noisy, and they lead to tremendous alert volumes. And they just overall, and obviously we'll get into this in our behavioral versus malicious segment, but an entity can take on many forms within an environment. And this legacy approach to baselining and relying on static entity analysis doesn't work in this cloud native age. It just really doesn't. And so I feel like a new way is taking form, a new way is taking shape. And I think Snowflake is the best prepared to talk about this kind of thing. So diving into behavioral versus malicious intent, let's talk about that. Like, which key areas should we be applying it? I think we talked about this earlier this week, that John, you said that it's really it's mostly hot in the onboarding and offboarding. Can you tell us more about that part?
Yeah. So the question comes up of where do I start with a program, or what should the focus be? And I always say your stories are really going to, what story do you want to focus on? And you have, I think, as an organization, the most control over people that are leaving. They have the intent to leave your organization. That time period. They're voluntarily doing this for the most part. And so you can tightly control who they are, establish what they've been doing. And then if you're doing like modeled behavior, how are they deviating from that much? And then you can have narrow lenses and scopes, and even like protections around what they can do, because they should be passing off work. They shouldn't be ideally still communicating or bringing on new business. That all should be passed off to their team. So you can sort of narrow their lane of access within the organization. So that's sort of where I would start with getting a handle on your departures by department or broadly by the organization, depending on how big you are. Like it extrapolates if you're a large organization, but that's where I would start. You anchor that, and then you say, well, in a traditional response scenario, you have an attack lifecycle. In the attack lifecycle of an insider threat, if you take out like the, not espionage, but just the outside recruitment stuff, is when a person applies or when they onboard, right? That's the life cycle. And so if you have those two bookends narrowly controlled, you don't need to ignore the middle pieces, but you can then strategize how you're going to focus on these middle pieces, because trying to tackle everything at once, you'll get what you talked about, this false positives, this inundation of alerting, and then you sort of get stuck. You don't know where to go and how to tune all of this noise.
Yeah. So you're saying throughout their course of employment, the middle part is what's been notoriously noisy for organizations if they're really, really honing in on, flagging deviations on their day to day, because it's really hard to model like intent in the day to day. So the high risk periods are in the offboarding, like when they're trying to download everything before they go.
Right. A person, take for instance, a person in sales that has built a lot of relationships over 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And they really that's their information. They really feel a sense of ownership over that information. And so we get into like the sort of a mistake or negligence side of things, where I don't disagree with how you feel about this, but by policy, by practice, it's not. And so we may go into this later, but having your policies tight and forming the right relationships internally with your team helps with those conversations you have if or when a negligent or a signal comes your way, I'll say.
I agree with John, to what we were talking about earlier about how different organizations may not have insider threat programs because it's wildly overwhelming to look at the amount of data movement in your environment. And just being able to approach it from in categorizing the different employees by the employee life cycle from when they start to when they leave, it really helps break that down on what indicators you want to focus on for where that data is going. And then once you nail down the onboarding employee, the offboarding employees, you can focus on the everyone in between. Before you have an offboarding employee, you have indicators that may tell you this person is planning to leave the company. Maybe it's the performance. Maybe they're applying for different jobs. And those indicators will help you monitor for the behavioral activities that you want to baseline and compare to what they're doing.
I think John brought up a really good point that I think we should stress here, which is that sense of ownership over work, over, whether it's clientele that they've built, code that they've written, relationships established, documents they've written. And this is where organizational policy and I'm going to say, education really, really matter, are really important for employees of an organization to understand that, when you're working on a company given laptop, all of what you're doing typically belongs to the company. It's the company's IP, it's the company's data,
Yeah.
the company's resources you've used to build whatever it is that you have.
Yeah.
But there is that sense of ownership, and I think more often than not, both Tammy and John's point, you see it pretty evident on that departure phase, right? Because now they're leaving. They want to take that code, they want to take those clients to the next company and start off with a bang. And or, we don't want to be on the receiving end of someone joining who's taken data from another organization, right? So it really is two really interesting use cases. Something else that I think is really important for that middle portion are controls. We talk about baselining behavior, but I think what can really help is implementing and establishing controls of what is, allowed usage of certain technologies, applications, apps that folks can use and should be using versus those that they shouldn't. And I think once you have a strong set of controls in place, it'll then be easier to, sort of spot those that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
I love that. I feel like a lot of organizations, I'm glad that we're sharing this because I do think most organizations that do have insider threat programs, they are stuck in that in between. They're stuck in this hamster wheel process of, trying to define these behavioral models that flag deviations that don't match their prior baselines or maybe their peer groups. And I think it's someone listening or tuning in that is doing that. I can imagine that they are wanting to have some wisdom on, how to properly tune those kind of things. When certain drift is acceptable, when drift is caused by role changes or burnout. Like can that actually be established? Are we getting to that point? Because a lot of that requires a significant amount of data, and our state of detection engineering report revealed that not everybody has the kind of money to feed that data to their SIM, right, or to their UBA tool. And its budgets aren't increasing year on year, and neither is headcount. So it's almost like you have your hands tied behind your back because you want to be doing this thing, but you don't have the proper means to do it. So I think that what you guys shared is focusing on this onboarding and offboarding is absolutely key. For the people being the perimeter, the modern perimeter, I want to get into that. I want to get into that aspect of it, right? What is you guys' take on how data lineage and access patterns clarify the context within your insider threat program, or if does it confuse it?
Yeah, Tammy wanted me to take this one, so I'll start. But I really, before we get into that, we need some pre-context here. It's like how we raise things to our team is through math, essentially. We say somebody has a baseline score of something, and Tammy can go into this, and she's actually published and talked about this as well, but there's baseline scoring for people. And if there's a deviation or a negligent or adverse event, that score changes in a positive or negative way. And so you talked about sort of like, in general, you can boil it down to if I don't have a data science team or haven't established a scoring framework, how do I get the burnout, for instance? If you have a very strong partnership with your HR teams, you can sort of get insight into like, who should I be paying attention to? Or is there a group of people I should be paying attention to? Or is there access to something I should be paying attention to more because of that? And so when you go into the question of like lineage or access patterns, we're talking about intent. And there's like two examples you could take, and very, very simple examples. And I know we're sticking on sort of the DLP topic, but I think it's consistent because I think everybody has that at their organization. They're concerned about it. But if I have person A, let's say I receive two signals, and one signal is for person A moving data from a internal or their laptop to ChatGPT, for instance, or any of these AI models. And then person B's signal is I'm moving it from my system to my email, right? I don't have to know really about their position or title or who they are, or really even what the data is to tell me like a story of intent. Like I can pretty much tell that in 5 seconds. Like, and it may be because I've been doing this enough to say, like, I probably know this person is moving it to this in order to have better data structure, to ask questions around it, to do their job, productivity. Where the person moving to personal email, there's really only one intent, is they want to take it and use it outside of the organization. And it's not to really say that data should exist in either place, but I can go into it with sort of like, I kind of know when I interview the person, this is how it's going to end, what their answer is going to be. But I'd love for Tammy to talk about like a little bit about the math of like how we get there.
Oh yeah, I would love to get into the math.
Yeah, definitely. I view, I guess, like users as part of like what we call like asset and identity prioritization, because it's not only just the employees, but you have like service accounts as well, right? You have other entities involved, and each of those entities or identities can have access to certain sensitive data or non-sensitive data. We want to look at the permission scope. I think permission scope, the blast radius, right, is what should be given the heaviest weight. Because ultimately, in the end, if an account, a user is compromised, whether it being an insider or not, right, whatever permissions that user identity or entity has, gets compromised, and they have access to these different systems. And that weight should be given heavily on what they're doing, whether it be exfiltrating data or trying to maintain persistence in your environment. You could give additional indicator, like behavioral indicators as well, in addition to the permissions, to balance out, okay, in addition to what I have access to, what am I doing with the access? And that's where you kind of start straying from like the traditional atomic alerts, the firing one-to-one, and you can set different risks and severities for those detections and alerts, so that it tells that bigger picture to what John was saying, right? You have file lineage. What were they doing beforehand, during, and after? And that tells the bigger picture of what had happened.
Yeah, so like Sridhar Ramaswamy's computer is going to be a lot more higher in weight than another employee.
I will say it.
What I want to add to that is, you have what Tammy talked about in regards to asset and identity prioritization, and then there is UBA, right, which we've kind of spoken about a little bit. And what I feel, and maybe this is a bit of a hot take, or I'm going to say an old take, is UBA isn't your traditional SIM. It's just complementary, right? It's supposed to provide you, right, with like patterns of behavior. It's not. I feel like there was an era or a time. Where UBA platforms were starting to replace traditional SIMs, and I always really confused me. And when you think about the bigger picture of alerting, UBA is just a component. It adds to it. Like we have an asset identity prioritization framework, we also have a UBA framework. Like you need to have both, right? In a perfect world, they're looking for different things, but together they're extremely powerful.
Yeah, and if you're mature enough, then you have your UBA scoring within your other risk scoring, your AP scoring, as a modified enhancement. And I would encourage, if people go down this road, since we already sort of talked about how much noise it can generate, is to just be very focused on what you want the model to do, what you want to train it on. And then you still have to provide it feedback of like, you're doing it right or wrong in some way, but I wouldn't use it as a catch-all for everything. You have a problem you need help with, and from models, focus on that versus everything.
Yeah,
I've seen
the
vendors. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've had this conversation with Hyder before, and I really liked the way he had put it, where basically it's like you have these different camera lenses that looks at the different angles. And that's what pretty much the different models that you use do, right? Like the atomic alerting may look at one angle, but then you'll have, risk-based alerting at another angle, UBA on another angle.
Like your headshot, your side profile, your
Yeah.
all the
Your mugshot.
Your mugshot. That's absolutely right. I resonate with that so hard. I saw from the IBM side and also even here at Ambilogic, customers coming in with what I like to call the two-headed SIM problem. It's they have, one SIM for these use cases because it covered those like 10, 15 use cases really, really well for a specific audit report. And then they have like Exabeam for these 5 UEBA use cases because it's for another, regulation requirement. And then they have to now manage and inherit two separate SIMs, and there's no correlation happening between the two SIMs. So it's a whole maintenance headache too, as well, to keep those two running and renewed. And so that's where there definitely has to be a better way, and there is, because data is not expensive anymore. It's pretty cheap. We've hacked the storage modernization cost of it, of separating compute and storage. So there is a better way, and that's why I'm so excited about the data lake movement taking place with like folks like you guys. Now, you talked about a little bit earlier the role that legal plays in your program. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why it's so crucial to make your cross-functional relationships?
Oh, yeah, sure. So if you have, this is my opinion, I guess I'll say I don't think it's gospel, but if you have a program and you don't have agreements or established relationships or established cadence with your HR partners, your compliance partners, and your legal partners, you're going to have something that happens, and you're going to get stuck in an investigation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you get a signal, somebody did something from a security standpoint, you mitigate it, you stop them from doing it, but if you don't have a relationship or some access to determine if it's a bigger issue outside of security that would warrant some further action, it's siloed. And it may happen again with this person or sets of people. And there's no security can only do so much in terms of corrective behavior. They're only given so many tools and so much permission to do these things. And so what I would encourage is to establish some sort of investigative framework between those partners, and it's agreed upon, so that when a signal is passed, everybody knows what to do. It's streamlined. And if something is outside of that defined boundary, then it's bigger. It's bigger than what everybody's already agreed would be just a 5-hour resolution. I mean, you probably have a larger incident on your hands, and you should have like a wider response plan or crisis plan to manage that. But yeah, that for us, that's been the key, is establishing those partnerships over the years and making sure everybody's just aligned. When we send them something, this is what it means. We don't have an idea, or may not have an idea of what's going on in your world. So do we agree that, how we propose the plan going forward should be the way?
Yeah, I want to just echo what John said. Like, insider threat is a people and process problem. Like, tech alone won't solve all of your issues and challenges, right? You have to build those relationships. It ends up being, I'm going to say, a force multiplier in the program for security. When they raise an issue, it is now they have legal's backing and HR's backing to take action, right?
Totally.
Rather than it being a surprise or there being a lack of alignment. So really building those relationships is extremely critical for the insider threat program. Like, it's a team sport. Don't go at it alone, right?
Oh, that's going to be a clip, and you know it. But it sounds like you guys' relationship with your legal team is very, very smooth. I don't share that experience. I find that it adds so much time to things. It makes things more complicated. It's like it adds 2 to 3 weeks in between things. So, and I can say that because I come from a family of lawyers. I was pushed to be a lawyer, and I completely rebelled against it. But thank you for sharing that. On that topic with lawyers, I can imagine contingent workers or contract workers. It's kind of in that alley too. Should we be thinking about them differently than full-time employees as it relates to insider threats?
I would say yes and no to that, actually. Yes, in the sense that they have a term, right? Contract contingent workers. There's a start date and an end date, which you don't usually have with regular employees until they put in their notice. And I know with like contingent workers too, contracts could be renewed. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to what do they have permissions to do? What's their scope of work, right? And we go back to like the asset identity prioritization. We look at the permission set to see if they are, doing any sort of privilege escalating, gaining access beyond what their scope of work is. But that's same with regular employees as well. It shouldn't be just limited to contingent workers. Sure, there might be a greater risk in the sense that if you are maybe hiring contingent workers through a third-party source, if you have a third-party like contract company who's hiring, their background processes, their interview processes, they might be different from your own. And, given the surface area of the different like insider threat attacks with the DPRK workers, right? Yeah. You want to make sure that those processes are pretty locked down and you vet out who you're hiring and that they are held to the same standards that your company has.
I love that take. With that, I didn't want to get into how much of a shit show the job market is right now, but it is kind of relevant in this paradox state because you could take advantage of that opportunity. And you brought up the what did you say? DPRK freelancers. They're infiltrating these Western tech companies, and I know that lawyers, they like to. That's a little bit of a loophole to get around. You want to hire remote employees like in other countries because of the cheaper labor. A way to get around that is through a contract if they're just contractors, but then you also run into this vulnerable territory, and there's only so much you can do against that, right? It's because there's no logging being taking place in the external route. There's only so much that we have control over. What do you guys advise for organizations that are dealing with this all of this vulnerabilities around resume exchanges, fake career sites, things like that?
I'll take a stab at it, and then looks like John was going to say something. But I think what's really important to both John and Tammy's point is to build those relationships with HR, recruiting, legal, right? All your teams that you're going to be working with. And in this particular instance, we're talking about recruiting and adding the right amount of friction to the process, right? When a candidate's applying, and if it's, like to Tammy's point, like contingent workforce or FTEs, having some level of standardized process around who you're hiring, how you're hiring, and just the steps of verification you're taking so that you're not, hiring someone from the DPRK, or it doesn't have to, I know DPRK gets a lot of attention. It could be another threat actor. It could be someone who wants to get Bay Area pay or New York City. Yeah. They just, they have the skills and they want that pay. So
yeah.
You wanted to add, sorry.
I was just going to say it's the same thing when we've had to establish relationships with multiple recruiting partners to not only tell them we exist and what we do, but we call them our human firewall, right? They are the people that are going to be looking at resumes. They know we said this to them before too, so it won't be the first time they hear it or anybody hears it, but they are the first line of defense. They are the people, and we are the security people. And so when we were meeting with them, we said, if we had our way, it would be A to Z, but we are not you, right? We don't talk to people. It's not our job to recruit people. Where can we meet to where you guys are catching it? We empower you with the ability to do things like tagging in your recruiting system so that people downstream aren't wasting their time, managers aren't wasting time interviewing. We catch at the beginning. But I think the more important point is like defensive depth, so that if for whatever reason somebody that had malintent to join the organization, you have the proper detection in place at the onboarding. You have the proper profiling of the first 90 days. Maybe we talk about increased scoring the first 90 days, so that maybe they may generate more alerts, but it's probably more important that they do, because they're knocking on some boundary they shouldn't. And it's an opportunity really for a new employee to train them on, okay, we understand you did this. here's the policy, review it, sign it, and move on, right? So
Mhm. I think a lot of this too is coming to mind is that if you're a recruiting agency or if you guys have, what did they call it? Back in the day, they called it, what is it when you clear the background check and you have to run through what risk they are to you based on the background check before you onboard a new supplier in that case, but I feel like it applies here too. There was a
like an I-9 verification or clear,
things
is
like
that what you're talking about?
things like that, but I think there's I'll it'll come to me. There's an
Okay.
acronym. There's an acronym for assessing this risk before you onboard. And LexisNexis is a tool that you can
Mm,
use to do it. But now I saw this girl on Instagram Reels the other day that she got denied of a job because this process is getting so good, and they were trying to bring her on. The last check was like if she was a culture fit, and they were able to trace real what they called obscene tweets, which were really trolling tweets that she posted in like 2012. Nothing racist or anything, but just trolling tweets, and that was enough for them not to move forward with her. Like,
yeah, I mean, it that ties to what Hyder was saying about company culture. Some companies just have it's zero tolerance, no
yeah,
matter if you said it when you were in high school
yeah,
or college or you know yesterday, right?
mhm,
It's a company choice at that point, right?
yeah. And with remote work as well being such a crucial part of our lives, and even more in like tech companies like Snowflake and startups like Yanvologic, the line between work and after work is getting real blurry.
Hmm.
And then with you guys, you guys are a part of other podcasts and other channels, and our communities are kind of tight knit. I'm on the same Discord servers that I am on my work computer than I am at home. It's the line is getting so blurry, so that opens up that perimeter in this kind of remote hybrid work area. How should we be accounting for UBA in that sense?
I think the more traditional sense of UBA kind of fails in that sense, right? I feel like
Yeah.
before they would say, like, look at the hours that this person is working. Is it like beyond their 8 to 5? Hyder's up at like 11 p.m. East Coast time to beyond that,
Oh
still work,
no.
you know? So it's like those more kind of old school traditional work patterns
Yeah,
that I think fail in this new day and age where,
it's
people
true.
are able to work after hours. And, in those times, it's also a more focused time to work when people aren't slacking you all day.
Agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I'm recruiting a bunch of guests like yourselves always throughout the day, LinkedIn, throughout if I see that they posted something cool, I'm reaching out at like 9 p.m. But pop question, what do you think is more dangerous, missing an insider or over alerting on them?
Oh, Tammy and I definitely had different opinions. I'll let you go first, Tammy, on this one.
Okay. So, in my opinion, I think it's riskier to have those false negatives, missing an insider, because it's like you don't know what you don't know. And if they are still lingering in your environment, how long are they going to be there for? How long is it going to take for you to catch them? I can understand from the response side how overlearning can cause fatigue. And my goal, as especially coming, spending a little bit of time in response and now on the detection side, wanting to work with the response team and tuning these really noisy alerts. Like my goal is not to have a noisy alert in the
Of
queue for
course.
long, right? Like I
Yeah.
want to increase the fidelity of that and nail it down. And what I love about what we've done with detection and risk-based alerting is that you can still send these alerts, but you can adjust the risk for it. Like maybe this alert alone doesn't warrant an investigation, but paired with another alert or two
It
other
would.
alerts, like
Hmm.
it's kind of up to like the security and the org to kind of set that threshold. But
Mm,
it's like telling that picture of like, okay, once this person has done maybe X, Y, and Z in the attack path, then fire the alert. And that's where I would want to, where I feel like maybe like it would produce more alerts, but it also has to meet that threshold.
hmm.
So I don't disagree with that sentiment, but I think that
Sounds like you
they
do.
Well, and I mean, conceptually, I don't disagree with it, right? Like the approach, but I would say the over alerting is probably the more dangerous. And the reason is because you're not going to catch everything, right? People, like the psychology behind people will say, either I know I'm going to get caught or I'm not. And if I'm not getting caught, I'm probably going to just putter along until I need to escalate behavior or change behavior. And maybe you do bump into some detection at that point, and then the investigation opens and we start identifying all these things.
Mhm.
I think the problem that I would have with like over alerting is signal fatigue, and it's talked about for
Mm.
years of alert fatigue within response and SOC and everything. It's one more of the common reasons why people would change jobs, right? And so the worst thing that could happen is the analyst, the L1 or L2, whoever's looking at these signals gets desensitized to it, to where they say, my signal says that John Martineau is accessing the system. He's done this a lot, so I'm just going to Slack him to see if it's him. And he says it's him, and I close it as benign, and benign, or false positive, whatever you want to label it. And then John Martineau is discovered that he's been taking trade secrets for 2 years.
Oh
And when you
God.
go to litigation, or I'm not a lawyer, but like when it's taken outside the organization, and you have people that do sue the organization, and an AIG, attorney general, whoever comes in and says, well, you've been ignoring this for 2 years. What's going on? There's a
Yeah.
much larger problem than a detection doesn't exist, and so we didn't catch something. Then we have caught it and did nothing about it. My opinion. So that's why.
I think it comes down to perspective. And I think what you just saw
Right.
is, Tammy's speaking about it from the threat detection side. And on the threat detection side, the challenge that we have is if we don't alert on it, then the finger is pointed back at the threat detection engineer saying, why didn't you have an alert for this? Why
Yeah.
didn't you have a signature? Right? The SOC team and IR team can put their hands up and say, well, we didn't get an alert. On the flip side, from an incident response or operational perspective, for those folks that are on the front lines, that are triaging this alert, and I've been in that position, it's extremely difficult, when you have 100 alerts in the queue, they're all critical, right? And
Mhm.
so it really comes down to perspective. But I do think that really establishing mechanisms, to Tammy's point and what she built in asset identity prioritization or risk and entity based alerting, or even having a strong feedback loop. So we have something called detection improvement requests. We
Okay.
have something else called like our detection review council and DRC, and detections automatically getting quarantined, and there's a lot there that I could talk about. But having, I'm just going to say, a strong feedback loop, whether it be technical process or just a relationship between the folks that are actually triaging the detections to understand their pain points. Because if you're not the same team, which at Snowflake, we're not the same, we're not just a single detection and response team. We are, technically separate teams. Keeping that strong relationship is extremely important.
That
So
is,
is
I
it,
want to like just for 2 minutes,
yeah.
seconds, highlight that, because that has been, like I said, Hyder and I, 2021 is when we all joined. Tammy left us for IR for TD in 2021, a lot of change. But over the past 4 years, that DER, that review council, like all that process it was iterative. It was very iterative because we
Really?
would hit friction and then we had to improve. And I think now we have three like major points of like detection improvement, where we have auto quarantining if there's a lot have fired, so there's no human involved. And then we have DER, that L1 will manually say there's something fundamentally wrong with this, so change it. And then we have a review council that says we've had a lot of DERs for this. Do we need to decommission this completely, or is the strategy behind the original intent of this sound? Does it need
Mhm.
to change? Does something need to be built to change it too? I just want to highlight that, because like if as your organization grows, you're going to have to implement these things to maintain like a
Your
smooth
corpus,
operation.
your corpus of detections, right? And we're talking, there's the traditional SIM detections, there's your UEBA models, there's
Right.
how
Endpoint.
endpoint, right? It's not going to stop. The
Right.
the organizational attack surface, technical attack surface, right? It's only going to expand, and so your corpus of detections should likely increase. And so as you're doing that, you're going to have more noise, you're going to have more alerts, you're going to have more signal. And so
Mhm.
really, I like to say, like, flipping alerting on its head too, like the atomic alerting structure, like it's not going to work, right? You're going to have to get creative. you're going to have to look at, different angles, perspectives, like Tammy's point, like, UEBA and what someone's score there is, their asset identity prioritization score, their risk baselining, like all of that to get a comprehensive picture, of the activity that's occurring.
Yeah, it's just as much of a tooling, but also people, relationships, and process issue. This whole realm, and it sounds like, and I kudos to you guys for establishing all of that because it's not something that happens within one calendar year. Even it takes. How long did that take you to establish? Would you say?
The detection part or the relationship part? Because the relationship part is
All of
like
it.
it's ongoing, right? Because you have
It's
people that maybe
ongoing.
come in and out, but like the relationship part, I'd usually say it's ongoing. We started in formally in March 2023, and things change, systems change, people change, but I would say art like plainly, it probably took a year before we decided there are a lot of these standard investigations we could streamline. We had then formalized it, got the sign
Mhm.
off, and so we were spending, I don't know, dozens of hours per like these normal cases, and we got just with that, like defining that and getting like even the risk severity and the investigation us under like 5 hours now for
Wow.
from between when a signal is generated to where we are wrapping up like an interview with the person or subject. So yeah, there's a lot involved with those middle pieces, but
Yeah.
if you can get it standardized and agreed among your parties, you save a lot of time and a lot of like what ifs if something happened. You know what you're gonna do. It's templated, right?
Yeah. Well, you heard
And
that,
then
listeners. Establish your relationships with HR and legal.
well, and your TD partners or whoever your other partners are, right? Our
Yeah.
TD partners. I mean, that's the Detection Review Council is the last like iteration, and that was last year. So it took 3 years for us to get there, get people on board that had done it in the past, and it made sense. And then more recently, it again we just have plain conversations of should we even detect on this anymore? Does this even make any sense? And there's I think 8 of us that meet every 2 weeks to sort of what's on the docket this time. Okay, here's the decision, move on, right? That's how
Good.
we sort of
Well,
handle it.
may those meetings never fall off the calendar.
No, they won't.
Looking ahead, another thing that really stuck with me is being desensitized to over alerting. I'm thinking a lot about that because that is not a situation you want to be in. That is when most things get missed. And when I look ahead and at the market and of all of these AI stocks coming into play, where they're
Mhm.
essentially just dressing up alerts and they're giving you all of this automatic triage, like we can automate all your level 1, level 2, level 3 triage with this AI stock analyst tool, whatever. And it's like if that alert was bad in the first place, like you're moving fast in the wrong direction. You're moving backwards. And that's why I always stress the importance of figuring out this piece of it, because this is the complicated part. This is the most impactful part that will create that by focusing on it, it creates a better downstream into your nice fancy AI SOC tool, right? And that's why when I think, like, when I look ahead, I'm a little bit concerned with all of that. And Gartner talks a lot about the hive cycle. Hopefully, we're at the tail end of it. But with MCPs, right, and agentic AI and autonomous workflows orchestrating these things are probably going off of service accounts, right? How do we model their behavior, this agentic behavior? Do we establish them as entities? Do we give them an employee number? Like, how do we do
Mhm.
that?
I'll let Tammy or John take that one. But like before we get there, I think what's really important that you kind of touched on is, what we call like AI data readiness, right? Like if you're
Ah,
going to start implementing and adopting, AI in certain use cases, like you need to have good data. You need
yeah,
to have clean data for it to work off of, or
and a
else
lot of it.
and a lot of it, right? To start training these models to start, being able to do, anomaly detection and the likes. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Like I think that's extremely important.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Tammy, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, to your question in terms of should they be employees? Absolutely. It's an entity. It has permissions
A
to
service.
do X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah.
so it should have the same risk assessment as would any employee or any other service account. And if anything, those accounts should be monitored very closely to see, do they deviate from what they're expected to do? That's where you get into the permissions that you give, the permissions that you set should be very granular. Yeah. So you're not, provisioning or more permissions than they need. And you're monitoring for their activities so they don't deviate from what they're expected to do.
There was somebody that was here maybe a year ago that I sort of pondered this about a little bit, where, so again, I guess I'm coming from the response side is like, so we now have something where there's a wrong assessment made, or there's, let's say, negligence on behalf of the agents, right? Well, what do we do with that? Who's responsible? What is responsible for that, for the SOC agent being wrong or interpreting something wrong? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have any checks and balance in place, you're just sort of taking it and saying, yeah, this is bad because it told me it's bad. Then are you making, let's say it's an insider threat signal and it's telling me that Hyder is doing something negligent and it did this action on him and it isolated his endpoint and it knocked him out of everything. And Hyder's like, dude, I was just sharing something with a customer, or I was accessing this cloud service because I was testing a new app I'm building. And now I've lost a day of productivity. Like, how far do you take it? Right. And then there's unfortunately, like there is always like, well, who's to blame? And then what do you do about that? How do you correct that? And I think I'm not against like agentic things. Mm-hmm. What I'm against is just implementing without a plan or structure around these non-technical questions of what happens when we are right, wrong, and then how are we doing checks and balance with everything? Really.
I want to just add and second that, like, Overwatch is extremely important, right? Like, do we need a bot to watch the bot, right? Because really, if you start giving full autonomy to which I think we're going to get there, but you start implementing these agentic SOC workflows or any other workflow, and you think about it, what if the bot becomes an insider? What if they go rogue, right? Yeah. I mean, just last night, the whole Grok, wildness, right? Or the story of, I forget which company is out. I don't know if it wasn't Google, but the one where, the person was like having an affair and the AI model threatened, to expose that person.
Oh yeah, I kind of remember that.
There's wildness, right? Like it's getting wild. So I definitely think oversight, overwatch, and being cautious of like over-reliance is extremely important here.
I am curious. Sounds like all of y'all's probability of doom score is high, just like mine. Did y'all read the AI 2027 study? I
haven't read it.
It's like a month by month prediction up until 2027 of will super intelligence take over. The result of it was it's closer than we think. I like to be positive about it, and I've come to the conclusion that I feel like their AGI is smart enough to know that we kind of need humans to run their mega farms of servers. But who knows? This is it gets into that topic. I feel like I always end the episode this way. How do we model behavior that isn't human anymore? It really is a question. But.
Yeah, it's, I guess, like, okay, I'm not a doomsdayer, right? I'm very much in sort of like the realm of we can use these things to help offload mundane. And then think about when a traditional incident response, you have an external attacker and you need to pass off things like an IOC, person's doing IOC sweeping or threat hunting or whatever, or plane detection, or I need to like analyze malware and I don't have a malware analyst. You can pass these things off and handle these tasks, right?
Yeah.
But when you're talking about like, how do you monitor the system? Well, if you really kind of think about it, if you have UBA models and you're giving feedback and saying this isn't right or this is right, you're monitoring a system. And so could you write a system that monitors it and tells it to adjust score? I mean, sure, a human can do that, but then the human has to monitor the monitor, the monitor's the monitor. And so like when do you stop? But I think like a programmer smarter than me can like probably figure this out. But we're already the human's already monitoring a machine if you're monitoring the math behind your risk, right? And you're saying you're right or you're wrong in some way. So that's sort of like, I guess, my take on it.
I think the adoption will come down, or implementation will come down to like three different phases where it's like, automation support with like AI, there's like augmentation, and then the full agentic workflows. And I think everyone's like, to me, that's the crawl, walk, run of it. We may be past the automation part, the crawl part, where folks are trying to just shoot for that full agentic workflow.
Definitely.
But it's, easier said than done. I think there's a lot of intricacies that need to be considered as you look to establish and build, those full agentic workflows. So
that is definitely going to be a question on our state of detection engineering report this year, is how is to compare that data between just 1 year after the other, is how far along are you actually really in your AI projects? And that'll be interesting to see, because everyone's saying they are, but no one's at least proven to me that they're making it do anything remotely effective. It's still very experimental. And on a recommendation level, trusting it to actually fully execute things seems very counterproductive, like you said, when security gets into the way of productivity, and that's why everybody hates us. But that's what you don't want to get into. But overall, guys, and Tammy, thank you so much for the incredible insight shared today. You are all most certainly welcome back on our podcast, hopefully to talk about, I feel like we covered a lot of topics that we could even just further deep dive
into, for sure.
Exactly. So thank you all so much for joining us on Detection Dispatch. Remember to build those cross-functional relationships, because people aren't always the weakest link, right? They're the perimeter now. And so are our bots, so are our MCP servers and our agentic workflows. So keep watching for those patterns and mine the drift. Until next time.